and we're back in record time.
Good morning. This is another interview, or I'd prefer to call it a conversation, conducted in under the state's bicentennial celebration. And this was funded through a grant which was applied for through American Aid Grange and given by the state and other people. We got two gentlemen here from Oars Island this morning, and we're going to talk about their perception of how Harpswell has changed and what they did in their lifetimes on Oars Island and other places they went. I think between the three of us, we can come up with some pretty good stories. So without further ado, what's your names, gentlemen?
I'll defer to my older brother for starters.
I'm Chip Black, and I am the older brother of Steve's. Yeah.
I like to emphasize the age difference because I'm holding on to the fact that I'm 4.5 years younger, and I'm Steve Black, Chip's younger brother. That's my status in life.
And I'll just explain that everybody in town knows Chip as Chip or Chipper, but his proper name is Ralph Black, Jr.
Yeah, thanks, Sam.
And when were you born and where?
Okay, I'm being nudged. So I was born at Mercy Hospital in Portland, 1948.
Okay, if you prefer not to answer that question, that's all right.
No, 48.
48.
Well, I was born at a little house in Brunswick on Pleasant Street, across from what is now Tessa's Market. And at the time, it was a hospital that was run by Harpswell in 1944, just after the war ended, before the war ended.
And I'm presuming you both spent your childhood on Oars Island, and what school did you go to?
Well, being the firstborn, I went to Bailey Island kindergarten in first and second, and then we moved over to Oars Island. There was school on Oars Island. We're in grades 3, 4, and 5 in one room, and 6, 7, and 8 in the other rooms. However, the Oars Island School closed in 1957, I think, and I did my 8th grade at Harpswell Island School, newly built Harpswell Island School in 1958. So and then I went on to Brunswick High School after that.
Okay. You didn't go to a tuition school such as Freiburg Academy or MCI. I know a lot of people from the island did that rather than go to Brunswick High School in the old days.
Well, I think that's true, Sam. A lot of people in my age level, yours too perhaps, who did go to Freiburg, and it was a tuition. I don't think Harpswell paid, I think it was private pay at the time. Mm-hmm. Maybe later on it was some tuition. But we didn't do that. We stayed on Oars Island and went through 8th grade and on to Brunswick.
How about you, Steve?
I also started at the Bailey Island Schoolhouse that our grandfather Albert Black later purchased, and now is a private home. But at the time, and I was 4, soon to be 5, but I started at Bailey Island not the general store, Bailey Island School when it was a 2-room schoolhouse, and grades 1 and 2, what was also called sub-primary, so I think that's the kindergarten equivalent. And then I moved upstairs, or the older grades at the time were 4 through 8 upstairs. But by the time I went into 4th grade, the new Harpswell Island School had been built. And so I went grades 4 through 8 at the Harpswell Islands, and then on to high school in Brunswick. But I have to mention the real highlight of going to the Bailey Island Schoolhouse was the 2-story outhouse attached to the back of the building, which as a child fascinated me, and I found that even as adults, people are intrigued by the engineering of a 2-story outhouse. And I think it has to be in the historical record that generations of Orrs and Bailey Islanders remember that aspect especially. And a few other teachers.
Where was the Bailey Island Schoolhouse? Because I don't know, and I don't remember it.
No, it was right across from the community church. It's a 2-story building.
It still exists?
Yes, and because of our grandfather having owned it after it was closed, I think Chip and the family gave the crock, the water crock that we used to fill paper cups with, of water. We gave it to the Historical Society.
Well, Steve, you know more about it than I do. That is new news to me, that our grandfather purchased that building.
Yes, it's because because of your age.
Come on.
Forgetfulness.
Well, I'll let you two argue about age, but I will admit that I'm older than either of you.
Yes, you are, Stan.
And I don't think you'll let me forget it either.
Now that you've told us, yep.
What did your parents do during the day? In other words, what did your dad work at? What did your mother do?
What did my parents do? Well, my father was born and raised on Orrs Island, and because of his, in his childhood, he had a friend that had a dump truck. And when he was 14 or a teenager, he worked with a shovel and a dump truck and continued that through his entire life, working in construction of some kind. Mostly playing in the dirt. He also, later in life, worked for a contractor in Cundy's Harbor named Louis Stewart, which everybody probably remembers. And my mother, on the other hand, she also worked, but more domestic work. She worked for the Baxters in the Brunswick area, and then she did domestic work on Orrs and Bailey Island, and later became a postmaster of Orrs Island Post Office. Nice couple, great parents.
Oh, wonderful people.
And so that's kind of quickly, that's my parents.
I can elaborate a little bit, and in that our father also, before he worked for Louis Stewart, he was the only employee of Herman Coombs in construction, and for years, I remember on Friday nights we would go to the Herman and Louise Coombs house overlooking Mackerel Cove, where our father would turn in his time card with the total hours worked, and Herman or Louise would write out our father's earnings for the week. Mm-hmm. But it was also a time for us to socialize with their children, Bill and Leo Coombs, who were our closest friends. And in the case of Bill, still alive, and he and Chip are close friends. Leo died of lung cancer within this past decade, but that friendship lasted a lot for many years. Yeah. Our mother, I'll just say, our mother also did a variety of things, including driving our family car as a school bus, transporting Orrs Island students to the Bailey Islands School. Mm-hmm. And I always was impressed that she could fit in somehow legally, or maybe not so legal, what seemed to be like 10 kids in a little sedan, and it had a school bus sign that was strapped on the roof, and made it into an official vehicle to transport Orrs Islanders to Bailey Island.
Yeah, and I also remember your father's connection with Herman Coombs, who was Harpswell Road Commissioner for a long, long time. Mm-hmm. And I remember town meetings, especially the meetings at Cundy's Harbor that I went to with my parents. And your dad would sit up front with Herman. Herman was well liked all over town. Every year, Louis Stewart ran for road commissioner. And when that warrant article came up, who shall be elected road commissioner, Louis would jump up in the back row of the town meeting hall, and he would go on about a 15-minute speech, somewhat of a rant, and quite loud. So loud that quite a few people would usually walk out and have a smoke or something else. But the upshot of all that was that for years and years, Herman was reelected road commissioner. And it's kind of ironic that your dad went to work for Louis in later years.
Yeah.
It's your interview. I got to stop telling
But I
stories.
can add to that a little bit, Sam. My father went to Herman and asked him for a raise, a 25-cent an hour raise. And Herman said he couldn't do that. And so my father began to look around for other work. And he was getting along in his years, so he needed to make up for some lost wages that he'd had previous years. And but they remained friends, and life went on, and Dad went to work for Louis Stewart and made a little bit more money than he had with Herman.
Yeah.
But anyway.
I don't want our mother to not have as much time on this topic, so let's also include the fact that she worked as a bookkeeper for
Emor
Alexander, who was a lobster dealer on Lowell's Cove on Wars Island. Right?
Yep.
So our mother was the daughter of Mamie and George Washington Doughty, Washy Doughty, and she was the daughter who stayed at home and sacrificed her formal education in order to take care of our grandmother, who was blind and had become more and more blind with each birth. And she was the mother of 6 children, one of whom died in infancy. But my mother was our mother was a very compassionate and very loving person, and so she didn't go beyond 8th grade, even though we recently found her report cards for grades 1 through 8 with straight A's every year, straight A's. I always said our mother could have been a wonderful dean of students at the college level, because she was bright, she was articulate, very caring, but didn't have the benefit of formal education. She did use her GED degree that she wasn't proud of getting, but I think she should have, to then qualify as a postal worker, and then for 7 years she was the postmaster, where I always thought she should be called the postmistress, but apparently that was not official language in the 1970s. So she was the postmaster, and that was an interesting job for her.
You mentioned Lowell's Cove, and that brings up another question. What did each of you do to earn money in your teenage years? I know that made me think of the moss plant there, and I know a lot of teenagers raked sea moss and sold it to the plant. Another thing that you did was work at the dogfish lab, which was just down the road from where you lived. And I know Chip especially was involved with that. I don't know whether you were or not, Steve, but how did you make your spending money when you were teenagers?
Why don't you start?
I earned money very early on, lobster fishing. I had a license at 11 years old, and that's another longer story. But and then as the teenage years went along, I mowed lawns. I mowed a lot of lawns, and then this dogfish lab that Sam spoke about was a company from Rochester, New York called Ward's Natural Science. They had been on the Maine coast prior to the location at Orr's Island, but they had also been on Bailey Island for years prior. But mainly the local boys were all paid well. I don't remember how much, but I do remember at one point I wanted to be with Ed Johnson on the boat that caught the dogfish, and I was paid $1.50 an hour, if I remember correctly. But those were some of the jobs that I did as a teenager. Did some lobstering, mowed some lawns, worked at the moss plant, dug some moss, and also worked at the dogfish lab, as it's called.
I should explain, you and I know all this. We all know this, but people watching don't know a dogfish is a sand shark.
Correct.
And generally
2 feet.
foot to 2 feet long. And they were prepared at this lab that we speak of for dissection by students at college level students, I think.
I think you're right, and the dogfish were the veins, arteries, and the digestive system, I think, were 3 places in the body that were injected with colored liquid latex, which would harden and make it more easier for the biology student to see how the system operates. And
The workings of a shark.
Yeah, the circulatory system.
Yeah,
That's right.
And we should say also condolences to the family of the woman who
Yes.
was attacked by a shark in Mackerel Cove yesterday.
that's right.
And attacked and died.
And
Killed,
died,
killed, yeah.
which was unheard of in my lifetime around here,
Yeah, never.
and I'm sure yours too.
I'm glad you remembered to honor her with that reference, because it's a tragedy for sure.
How did you make money, Steve?
Well, not at the Dogfish Lab and not lobstering, which I regret. That's why when I retired back to Orr's Island in 2011, I got my 5-trap license so I could make up for the lost experience of not lobstering. But my experience on the water included going handlining for mackerel in Mackerel Cove when the uncle of Bill and Leo Coombs, whose nickname was Bish Orr. Bish Orr had a house at the head of Mackerel Cove and had at least 30 to 55 cats living in a very small space, and getting enough fish to feed those cats was an important part of his day. So my first fishing trip included catching my first fish, but I didn't like the idea that it was going to die. And so when Bish wasn't looking, I let the fish go, not realizing that it was already dead, and that he would then notice as it floated slowly to the bottom of the cove, and thus I got yelled at for throwing out a good fish, and it was one of the fundamental experiences of my childhood on the water. So it took me another 60 years to get back to pulling 5 traps, not being experienced around the water. So I've been envious of Chip's water experiences. But what did I do? I sold Christmas cards, and the whole neighborhood and all the relatives must have hated seeing me come in November. I did that often with Gail Delaney, now deceased, our cousin. I picked blueberries up on the ridge on Bailey Island that now has at least 6 houses, many of them with groomed lawns and no blueberries left that I'm aware of. I think I got 50 cents a quart for hand-picked blueberries. What else did I mowed a lot of lawns. By the time I was 15, I had $900 saved, which I used to fund my year as a Quaker exchange student in Germany, which set the course for the rest of my adult life, at least. But yeah, mowing lawns, and did I do anything else?
Sold grit newspaper.
Oh yes, my favorite job. Saturday mornings, pedaling from the Lane Road on Oars Island to Land's End on Bailey Island. I had a new bike. I had a bag with 50 grit newspapers. They were 15 cents a piece. I got to keep 5 cents. I sent the other 10 cents into the publisher, and I could qualify for a prize every month or two, including those tassels that would go on my bike handles, or even, and Chip and I still have these signs, little signs with our name that you could hang off the back of your bike seat. I have Chip's in my kitchen along with my own. So Ralph, Stephen. I got a bike bell. It was a big deal, and I got to meet 50 different families and individuals, some of whom I am very fond of still. Some of the very poorest families, I learned, would give the biggest tips, and that's stayed with me till the present. People who lived in what would be justifiably called a shack, but they would give me the biggest tips. And I met many people who are no longer alive, but who are alive in my memories.
Before we move on to what you did in your adult lives, how about a little family history? You made a joke about your tans and alluded to that, and I know Chip is as much a historian as I am, and I think you are too, Steve. So why don't you share the stories of your genealogy?
Yeah, you should.
Well, let me think a minute. It seemed as though our last name Black, and one of the first settlers on Bailey Island, his name became Will Black. And Steve and my assumption that we have descended down from the Will Black clan of the late 1700s. Right. Whether that's true or absolute, we just haven't come to that conclusion yet. But our history on Oars and Bailey Island go back a long way. And so there's a lot of history been accumulating over the years that bringing that section or that part of Harpswell history that has yet to be solidified. But we may have descended down from Will Black, and we're still here.
Yeah.
I can elaborate a little bit with more detail, but so we believe, as Chip says, that the family story is that we're likely descended from an enslaved man who was probably the first former slave ever to be able to acquire his own land, and that's in Elliott in the 1690s. And he had saved enough money so that he was able to buy, I'm not sure of the acreage, but there's still a field today known as the Black Field. And Jerry York, our cousin, and I walked on that land just 2 years ago. But his slave name had been Black Will. When he was freed, he changed his name to Will Black. he had an illicit relationship with a white European woman whose name I've forgotten, unfortunately, at the moment, but their offspring was described in the historical records as a mulatto, or of somebody of swarthy complexion. That was it, swarthy complexion, because his mother was white, his father was African. That next generation was also William Black, and he and his family took up occupancy on what was then known as Will's Island. Mm-hmm. And his son, one of his sons, was also the third, Will Black the third. It was that generation that was evicted around the time of Harpswell being incorporated, so in 1758.
Taken to trial and evicted?
Well, no trial that I know of, but there was no deed that Will Black the third could produce, even though the family had been on the island for several generations already. But the passageway, this is important in our taking some pride in the family history that we believe is accurate. The passageway between what was Will's Island, now Bailey Island, and Orr's Island is known as Will's Gut. Mm-hmm. Recently gentrified to Will's Strait, but the nautical maps all show Will's Gut. Yeah. And that's how this legend and historical record honors that memory of a man of color being the first permanent settler on now Bailey Island. Yeah.
Right, and some of Will Black's descendants were fishermen, weren't they? Banks fishermen, especially. I know there were some bank schooners where there was an Edmund Black.
Yeah, I brought this as a visual.
Oh,
so yeah. This is the story of our great grandfather. Chip has his name Harvey as a middle name. This was Harvey Cushman Black, mm-hmm. or Harvey Cushman Black. And this is the house that Chip lives in. This is our grandparents' house. Mm-hmm. Our great-grandparents' house burned in 1927. Mm-hmm. That was Black's general store and hardware and general store. Mm-hmm. And here's a picture of my big brother as an infant being held by our father. And it's 4 generations. Great-grandfather, the captain of the Albert Black, the fishing schooner. Our grandfather Albert Woodard Black. Our father Ralph Harvey Black Sr. And this is little Chipper. Okay, so,
nice.
Yeah. Now that I managed to embarrass us both, okay.
That's okay. Don't be embarrassed. I have no embarrassment.
But you could elaborate more about the boat.
Just that our great-grandfather Harvey Black and others holding shares in the vessel Albert W. Black, but his brothers also had a vessel called Edmund F. Black. Right. And they all did, typical ground fishing and trawling and sword fishing in the summer months. And but the story is that our great-grandfather gave up the vessel when he was 40 years old and came ashore and started a little general store on Orr's Island, near where I live now, near where the Orr's Island post office is. And he continued his life being a storekeeper until it burned in 1937, perhaps?
Not 27?
Maybe it was 27. I don't remember the details.
It was 7.
Yeah, then it would be 1927. So that's a little bit about our father's side, and of course our mother, who grew up on Bailey Island, and her father, George Washington Wash Doughty, he was a fisherman and also was a crewman on Harvey Black's schooner. the Albert W. Black. So we've had some history in the fishing industry, but it left us when we got to be adults.
Not to forget my contribution to the fishing history of the family. My mackerel when I was 4 years old.
Well, anyway.
Well, there are a lot of pictures of Washington Doughty.
Wash Doughty.
Wash Doughty. Several in Joyce Bibber's book.
Yeah.
Yep.
Most of them posed, but one or two are
Sure.
as he was doing something.
We have a lot of family pictures of our grandparents and great grandparents. That
Here's one actually.
yeah, this is a photograph of George Wash Doughty, our grandparent, our grandfather,
On the
holding a little duck that he obviously had found, and he was a good guy. I remember him well. In fact, Wash Doughty, his last years were spent living at our house, my mother and father's house. My mother took care of him. He became disabled with a leg amputation and so forth, but very gentle man, raised some great, had some kids, and anyway, nice guy. As all grandparents are, right?
Right, right. Grandparents exist to spoil the grandchildren, right? And become best friends.
I like the story that's been passed on that our grandfather made enough money on his first Grand Banks fishing trip at age 16 to buy his parents' home, which our cousin Inez still lives in on Bailey Island on Oceanside. So he brought his parents, his father being David Doughty, to Bailey Island from Shabig. And with the earnings, as I said, from that first fishing trip, I'm not sure which boat he would have been on, but this is a picture of his father, David,
Don't hold it in front of your face.
who has a lobster down here at his feet, and this is the fish house that now is owned by Hamilton Starr III, who
Head of Mackerel Cove.
out at the head of Mackerel Cove.
Right.
This is the grandfather who also did some barbering, had a barber shop, possibly in this building or on the corner next to the Bill Munsey house. I'll tell a little story about our great-grandfather cutting our mother's hair when she was young. It would have been in the early 1920s. Mother was born in 1918, but she disliked his haircuts, so that to retaliate, she hid under the kitchen table, took scissors and gouged her hair. And then when anyone asked her who gave her that haircut, she said, "My grandfather." And that was the last time she had to endure his barbering. She was strong-willed and determined.
So what did you do after school before you left home? Did you play baseball, go for bike rides, or did you work all the time? Nose to the
Sounds
ground.
like we worked all the time, but we played too.
Yeah.
And well, I can tell a little short story. Shortly after I think it was 1952, I would have been about 6 years old, 7, 8 years old. There was a hurricane that came through, and it leveled a lot of trees in the southern end of Wars Island, where we grew up. So after the woodcutter came and took all the logs out and left some debris, a bunch of us kids built a container. We called it Fort Apache, because at the time on television, the early televisions, we had Roy Rogers and we had Gene Autry and a few of the other characters, and so we kind of relived our playing in the woods. We built this fort. It became Fort Apache, as I said. Steve was the littlest kid on the block, but we were all older and took advantage of him.
In that, I was assigned the job that no one else wanted, which was chinking with moss in between the logs of Fort Apache. At age 5, I was 5.
Right, and there is a video.
Yeah.
There is a video available that was done by a photographer named Harry Schulman, who was popular and worked for the Brunswick paper at the time, and he videoed us playing in this fort. It was rather humorous, but it included a lot of us kids running through the woods, and so anyway.
I think it was actually shown on Channel 6, Portland TV.
At the time?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was a big deal in 1953. I'd like to see if it's still archived somewhere, but
I have a copy.
you do? Oh, okay.
Did you belong to any organizations or attend church or fraternal groups, things like that?
I like to say, given that I'm a proud far left center politically, but I was a card-carrying member of the National Rifle Association by the time I was 8 years old, because we had a rifle club on Ores and Bailey Island that used a rifle range at Reed Cove off the Bayview Road, and it was organized by a man named William Haddon, who was a church organist at the Naval Air Station, and he was concerned that Islanders, boys and girls, weren't learning how to handle rifles safely. And so yes, there was a very active junior NRA chapter that taught us how to use 22s, right?
22, yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
And that was a very high point in our youth. Saturdays, the fathers, at least our father and a few others, came and assisted and taught us how to do all the shooting positions and the gun safety, and then we had that safety net that we had learned, and then of course I always had a 22 and a rifle, and used to walk the shoreline and shoot the birds, and sometimes I'd eat them and sometimes I wouldn't. But that was a highlight. That was one highlight I don't think about very often. The youth of growing up on a rural island and carrying a shotgun or a 22 and shooting birds off the shore. And I can remember walking from where I grew up down on the southern end of Wars Island, walking the shoreline, including, I think I went as far as Johnson's Point, which is now all residents. At the time, there was no houses there at all. Pearl House was the only one close by. So anyway, it was certainly a whole different atmosphere growing up on Wars Island and Bailey Island than it is today.
So tell us about what you've done and do for work. And
Before we do that, let me just throw in the fact that the church was an important factor in our lives.
That's right.
In addition to learning how to shoot a rifle. On a very different topic, I would say the Methodist Church that also included the Community Union Church on Bailey Island at the time played an important role. Sunday school was something that I think everyone was expected. Almost every family sent their children to Sunday school that I recall. Our mother was a Sunday school teacher, then a superintendent at some point of the Sunday school program, and We were sent to Methodist camp in Winthrop for a week at a time, and I think some of the lessons of showing compassion, being aware of people who are economically deprived in our society, a lot of those virtues and principles got laid in through the church teachings.
Was there a Boy Scout troop? Did you belong to the Scouts?
I'm laughing because I'm a failed Cub Scout.
I never participated in Boy Scouts or Cub Scouts. But at the time, I think, Steve, you did become a Cub Scout. And
Red, the woman who was the leader of our Cub Scout pack, moved away, but her husband was Red. He was a merchant marine or Navy person on the southern end of Bailey Island, right across from
Red Campbell?
Red Campbell. Mrs. Campbell was the Cub Scout leader, but then disbanded because she moved away and there wasn't a parent willing to take us on. But it was a short-lived experience in what I've come to think of as the paramilitary group. So between church, rifle club, paramilitary, it's been an interesting mix of influences. And the pacifist Quaker piece also.
And I know you've both been innkeepers of one variety or another. Talk some about that, both of you, would you?
Somewhere along the way, through quickly, I did graduate from high school, barely. I did barely attend college for a year or so up in Presque Isle, which I look back on as a fun time. Vietnam
might explain the brevity of the career, right?
Exactly. But in a nutshell, I flunked out, and I needed to eat, and so I got a job with my cousin who was a carpenter, and I went on life being a carpenter, and then at one point when I was in my late 40s, I purchased the Bailey Island Motel, and I ran that for 23 years, in addition to the building a lot of the houses on the Horse and Bailey and other parts of Harpswell, and anyway, I've recently retired from that and enjoying the rest of my life.
Yeah. And you have a boat.
Oh yes, my little boat
Yeah.
that was built in Harpswell.
Yeah.
I hope it stays in Harpswell because I'm going to sell it. So I hope to.
And tell about the origin of the boat and say a little more about it.
Well, a long time ago, I was going through a divorce, and I took a little ride over around Dolphin, Potts Harbor, and South Harpswell, and it was a little boat that had for sale sign. So I called the man, and it happened to be Bryant Minot. And he had it, and it was for sale for $5,000. However, when I did go to him, he said, well, it needs a new gas tank, so I'll knock off some money, and I've forgotten exactly how much money he took away because it needed a new fuel tank. And anyway, long story short, I still have it. It's been a real part of my life being out on the water, and so anyway, pretty little boat that was built in Harpswell by Henry and Herman Morse and Henry Barnes, but that was that's been a good part of my summertime enjoyment.
Okay, what was the question again?
The question was, what have you worked at in your adult life?
Okay, so I referenced an exchange student year when I was a junior at Brunswick High. In 8th grade, I had this goal that I wanted to explore either taking French or German as foreign language choice in 9th grade at Brunswick High School. And because our mother and father knew the host family in Bodenham, the George and Helen Millay family, who were hosting a German exchange student that year in a program that was sponsored by the American Friends Service Committee, the Quaker service organization. I asked my mother and father to drive us by the house because I wasn't sure we could afford to host a foreign student, but we decided that that because of the German connection, and we invited the German boy to spend a weekend, and he went with us, and he went out lobstering with Carl Johnson, our cousin, and here he was. I was an 8th grader. He was a high school senior. I'm not sure he had an exciting enough weekend, but he got introduced to lobstering in any case. And I then, 3 years later, spent a year in his city of Lübeck, and then several years later, my future wife came and lived with Guy and Helen Johnson at Cundy's Harbor, and Ned and Sylvia Frost in West Harpswell, and as an exchange student. So much of my adult life became focused on all things German. I ended up teaching German for 32 years, both in Maine and Massachusetts, and raising a daughter bilingually, and also teaching about the Holocaust. So a big focus of my later life has had to do with
German.
all things German, but especially around the Holocaust, because my second wife survived Auschwitz as a teenager, a Belgian Jewish child whose parents were murdered there. So it's a very emotional subject for me, but I'm very focused on the fact that Maine has a Holocaust and Human Rights Center based at the University of Maine in Augusta, and it has a very active program offering training to Maine teachers and sponsoring public events that all focus on the importance of eliminating prejudice and discrimination and honoring diversity of all types. So that continues to be a big part of my focus.
Ahead of the period you're talking about, there was an exchange student from Germany in my class at Brunswick High named Barbara Bauke.
I remember Barbara's name at least.
You
Yeah.
probably know of her.
Yeah.
A very nice person.
Yeah.
And what is it? American Friends is
Yes.
the group
Yes.
that facilitates exchanges.
They did at the time. It was a project that grew out of World War II, and the American Friends Service Committee was one of the first non-governmental agencies allowed into Germany after the Nazi defeat, and the American Friends Quakers established links between American schools, American communities, and German communities. And so Brunswick was affiliated with Lübeck, Germany, the first city to have been bombed by the Allies on as early as Palm Sunday, 1942, with a lot of deaths, in part in retaliation for the German V-2 rocketing of Coventry and London, probably as well. But that whole link between Brunswick and Lübeck, Germany, existed up to the Vietnam era, and then because of shortage of funds and anti-war activities, the club that helped sponsor these annual exchange trips was dissolved. But it grew out of the fact that there was a very active pacifist guidance counselor at Brunswick High School who was affiliated with the Durham Friends Meeting House. And I'm afraid I don't remember his name, and maybe you do, Chip, but
I'm trying to think of it, but I can't recall it.
He was responsible for linking these former two enemy states into something that was oriented towards building human connection, building a world based more on terms of peace than war. So.
Absolutely. The Quakers have historically always been involved in getting oppressed people out of war zones and things like that. As early as the American Revolution, they were doing that, and facilitating the Underground Railroad for runaway slaves, things like that. So they are peace-loving people who try to help people out who are in bad situations.
Yes.
And in Europe also, they a lot of them went to Europe.
There are significant Quakers and Unitarians who helped mostly Jewish victims of fascism and Nazi policies, so that some of those people were able to survive. A very, very admirable organization.
So nowadays you run an Airbnb.
Well, I am following my brother's example. He ran the Bailey Island Motel, and because we own this, I hate to give it a grander name than it deserves, but it is a nice example of a rural Victorian home, that Captain Charles Burnham Morrill House on the southern end of Orr's Island, that our mother and father were able to buy in 1978 at the full market value of $25,000 and sold to Chip, and then Chip and I eventually ended up owning it jointly. But it was built in 1902. The family took in boarders, as was the custom in the early part of the 20th century. Then it was vacant for 45 years, occupied mostly by raccoons on the third floor. Lots of water damage, but slowly but surely, Chip and I have managed to restore it to the level that I can advertise it as an Airbnb facility, except during a pandemic. So let's say it's not thriving this summer, but it is a bit of a landmark home because it's right on Route 24. It's right on the main road.
And Captain Morrill, you could tell dozens of stories concerning his life and how that building came into existence. But,
That's another whole interview about Captain Morrill. He's had some influence on Orr's and Bailey Island for many years, and we were fortunate enough to be able to purchase his house when he died and after he died, of course. But anyway, it's been a nice place. It's still.
What do you remember about him?
Well, I think Captain Morrill's that's another whole interview about his history and how he affected Orr's Island.
He was captain of a steamboat until he was quite old.
He was, yeah.
And had a tremendous record.
He did. 40 years as a Casco Bay Line captain. And most of the islands knew him, and a lot of the people from all the islands that he stopped along the way, and and that's where he lived, in the house that we own.
I'll just mention Captain Morrill, who I knew only as a young child. He died in 1952. I was 4 years old, but I remember him, and I especially remember the natural history room that he kept artifacts from the polar expeditions, because he was a friend and also the purchasing agent for Admiral Peary. When Peary was interested in buying up other islands in addition to Eagle Island. In the end, I think he owned 9 islands.
He needed islands to keep his dogs on.
Exactly. So Captain Morrow would be the front man for Admiral Peary in order to keep the prices from escalating. So if somebody was selling and thought they were selling to a local, that was to Peary's advantage. But we have some artifacts that have survived. Unfortunately, Captain Morrow donated to the Bailey Island Library Association most of the contents of that natural history room, and they've all gone missing in the past 50 years.
There's more to that story than that.
Oh, tell me more.
Hey ho, roll and go around Cape Horn to San Francisco. Shantyman, sing, boys, pull on the line, and we're back in record time. Now at Bath down in Maine they built many tall ships. They were paired up and flanked and launched down the slips. The strength of our nation was built on the pine of the mast trees that harnessed the wind. There were schooners and sloops and all kinds of small craft. There were warships with cannon both forward and aft, and the queens of the seas, Downeasters and Clippers, mighty proud men with their skippers, with their hey-ho roll.